nature, the universal mother, mistress of all elements, primordial child of time, sovereign of all things spiritual, queen of the dead, queen also of the immortals, the single manifestation of all gods and goddesses that are. My nod governs the shining heights of heaven, the wholesome sea breezes, the lamentable silences of the world below. Though I am worshipped in many aspects, known by countless names, and propitiated with all manner of different rites, yet the whole round earth venerates me. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tarot Favorites. We're still very much in the Major Arcana, and we have finally reached my favorite card in the whole deck of the tarot. And I started off with a little snippet from Robert Graves' translation of the Golden Ass, which was included in this book, When God Was a Woman, by Merlin Stone. This is a really interesting book about basically the history of patriarchy and where, when, and how. It investigates where, when, and how did female deity and goddess worship get replaced by the more patriarchal god worship. So even though I don't believe that this author's hypothesis and the evidence that she presents stands the test of time, because this was written back in the 70s, it's still really interesting. It's a very interesting read. So When God Was a Woman, and I opened up with those words because those words from the Golden Ass basically sum up my approach to the High Priestess and help me to tie the High Priestess back to my matron goddess. And my matron goddess, I call her Mama Creatrix. She is represented by all the very ancient Venus statues that have been found throughout North Africa, the Middle East, in caves throughout Europe from 20 to even 40,000 years ago. So that is my matron. And I guess just in a nutshell, the reason that the Mariel Tarot and its depiction of the High Priestess is my favorite depiction of the High Priestess is because this is the first time, or when I first saw this card, it was the first time that I got the idea to work with Mama Creatrix, to work with my matron. This is, of all the tarot cards, of all the decks that I've ever seen, this depiction of the High Priestess is the closest thing I've ever seen that represents how I envision and work with Mama Creatrix. So, yeah. But let's dive into this a little bit more deeply, and let me kind of go over the parameters in case this is the first time you've stumbled across one of my Tarot Favorites videos. And I'll link up here. I believe I have a playlist on my channel. So obviously I've already done the Fool and the Magician. I'm trying to do at least one of these each month to keep it going. And it's going to take a long time to get through all 78 cards, but we're starting off with the Major Arcana, and basically the idea of the series is I have an excuse to ramble and just share my thoughts about the tarot and the different cards in the tarot and the different archetypes. But specifically, I get to share my thoughts about why certain decks just get it right. Why certain depictions by certain artists and certain decks are my favorite depictions of each of the 78 cards. Right? So, as per usual, I usually have the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction here just as a reference, and sometimes the Rider-Waite-Smith depiction might be my favorite. And then I also share my my favorite, which, like I said, is the Mary L. Tarot, and Marie White's depiction of the High Priestess. And as you can see this time around, I have some stones surrounding us, and as I kind of dive into the explanation and talk a little bit more in depth about the cards and why the High Priestess is so important to me, I'll go over why these particular crystals and stones are here. And I'm sipping on a coffee, or not a coffee, I'm sipping on a black tea on this chilly November afternoon, and it is a cinnamon black tea, which is delicious and helps warm my bones. Oh, wonderful. And just to cover our bases here and get a general understanding of the High Priestess, I'm going to just share a few sentences from Lee Irwin's Gnostic Tarot. This is the first tarot book that I bought, that I read through, besides the little white books that come with the decks that I own. So I like to use this as kind of a reference just to cover the bases and to get a general, widely understood description of the card that we're talking about today. And then, of course, I'll look into, you can see my reflection in the camera. I'll look into the actual guidebook and share a little bit, just a few sentences here or there from the guidebook for the Mary L. So let's just cover our bases and see a general description of the High Priestess. And in this case, Lee Irwin uses the Ravenswood Tarot and the Rider-Waite-Smith as his main decks in his description, so keep in mind this image. So, in general, it represents intuitive ability that breaks the bonds of ordinary perception and opens the pathway through dreams or other unusual experiences. A capacity for self-examination that leads to wonder and amazement in the face of consensual beliefs and attitudes. A meditative wisdom that cuts through fears, anxieties, and denials, and thereby reveals higher and more noble aspirations. A soul's longing for illumination, light, and spiritual sustenance. A need for accepting and affirming the mysteries without demanding rational or empirical explanations. Receptivity to deep personal transformation. A time to throw off consensual decisions. Cut the bonds of deliberate action and follow your deepest intuitions. Okay, so basically in a nutshell, and Lee Irwin covered some of this in the description I just read for you guys. The High Priestess is, I guess, I don't know how you would call it, my soul card, my favorite card in the tarot, especially in the Major Arcana. It is the one that I connect with and identify with the most. It's the archetype in the Major Arcana that just speaks to my mind, body, heart, and soul. And I think a part of that has to do with just her connection to the intuition, to ways of retrieving or discovering knowledge that do not necessarily line up with consensus reality. So dreams, ecstatic visions, altered states of consciousness, meditation, just all of these kinds of non-consensual reality-based ways of knowing thyself, right? And just understanding your place in the universe. I've always been kind of in my head a lot. I remember one time when my dad's sister came to visit and she met my partner, and she was describing to him how I used to be as a toddler, so as a young child, and she basically, like, I can't really act it out on camera, but basically she just looked up towards the ceiling or towards the sky and just kind of like looked around, just trying to show somebody who's just completely immersed in their thoughts and in their perceptions. Like, I've always been so just receptive and pensive, I guess, and in my thoughts and in my head and just on another planet. Just completely on another planet. Like, I zone out and just, I lose myself to the astral quite naturally and, often. So I just have an openness to those kinds of altered states and spiritual experiences. I'm also a Sagittarius sun, and Sagittarius appears in a lot of my birth chart, so that might be an explanation why. So that spiritual discovery and exploration and intuition and altered states and the knowledge and wisdom that come from those altered states is just, it's just so juicy. I just love it. I love the High Priestess. I love it. And it's one of those cards that if I'm looking to buy a new deck, I have to jive well with the High Priestess in that deck before I buy it. It has to at least be decent according to my own standards and taste, right? Before I'm going to buy it. So, the Mary L, basically the Mary L, even though I don't really buy into the idea of a soul card or even a soul twin flame or a soulmate or anything like that, the Mary L is the tarot deck that is the closest thing to a soul deck that I feel comfortable with. It is my jam. Just Marie White's artwork and her descriptions of the cards in her book. It's just, it tickles my pickle in so many ways. And from the first time I ever saw any images of the Mary L. Tarot, I knew it was for me. I just knew it. And actually my partner gifted me the Mary L. A couple of years ago. This was actually my first non-Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It was actually the second deck I ever owned. So my first deck was a Rider-Waite-Smith. It wasn't this one. This is the Centennial Edition. It was the yellow box version. And then I jumped right into the Mary L. When I go deep into something, I just dive right in head first, right? So just the Mary L just speaks to me so clearly and so deeply. It's just, if I believed in a thing like a soul deck, this would be it, basically. And this card right here, like I said, I almost viscerally remember the first time I saw this depiction of the High Priestess. And it awoke something in me. That's the best way. I actually never thought of that. That's a new thought for today. Caught on camera. It awoke something in me, and that something eventually turned into my relationship with my matron, with Mama Creatrix. And that something also led me down the path of chaos and chaos magic and being open to potentiality and understanding that everything is connected and all sorts of fun and juicy stuff. So before I keep just fangirling on the High Priestess, which I can do all day, specifically this one, let's see what the guidebook and the Mary L has to say. And again, I'm not going to read the whole description, just the parts that call out to me. So the High Priestess, I am all that has been, and is, and shall be, and my robe no mortal has yet uncovered. Ebzu, Temple of the Abyss. Eagura, Temple of the Subterranean Waters. She is the Hymen Priestess, guardian of the gate of life and death with a veil of flesh. She parts her parchment scroll, or columnar legs to reveal the wisdom within. if you pull aside her veil, there may be several drops of blood like crimson pomegranate seeds to show that you passed that way. So, okay, let's pause here and deconstruct this. So we got hymens, we got vaginal, vaginal imagery. We got this idea of the veil, right? And I study apocalypse and apocalypticism and kind of a queer and post-colonial context. I don't want to go too in depth in my dissertation right now because that is just a tangent that will never end. But so this idea of the veil, I mean, apocalypse, you know, the Greek root of it, apocalypso, means to reveal, to unveil. But if you go even further back and study even further down into the roots of that word, it originally, from the research that I've done, it originally referred to the unveiling of the bride on the wedding night, the disrobing of the virginal bride on the wedding night. So there's some sexual components to this, right? And this idea that the physical act of sex is almost a liminal act. There's a before and an after. And now I fully understand, and I hope more and more people will understand, that the concept of virginity is a social construct. It's not real outside of the society that constructs and builds and believes in it. And also, we have to keep in mind the whole patriarchal bullshit thing. How the feminine, how female bodies are controlled and used, and how judgments about people who walk around in these bodies are made based on how much sexual experience these bodies have, and is their hymen intact? I mean, there's even hymen reconstructive surgery, for God's sake. You know, I mean, that's how, just still how much power patriarchy has, how a woman's or a femme's worth is measured by how intact their hymen is. I mean, just even the assumption that the hymen is somehow a sign of purity and virginity is just so fucked up. It's all fucked up. It's all fucked up. But it's really interesting in this depiction of the high priestess, because if we remove and uncover and clean off all that patriarchal bullshit that we've all been force-fed for millennia, and we look at the vaginal canal, the birth canal, the cervix as symbols of a liminal space, a space where there's a before and an after, a space where transformation takes place, it becomes really, really powerful. And even, I mean, the loss of blood as this seal or this space is broken, and the unveiling that happens in this transformative moment, it's all connected back to the flesh, to physical reality, to the body. One of the things that I'm very critical about when it comes to Western epistemology in general, and also just Christian Hermeticism and some of the Western mystery traditions, is this elevation of the transcendent over the physical. How somehow the transcendent is more important or more powerful or more pure or more spiritually enlightened than physical reality. Physical reality, which is often connected to the feminine body, is seen as less than, less developed, spiritually impure, dirty, full of sin, something that needs to be overcome or left behind at the moment of death, right? Well, this, in Marie White's description of the high priestess, she is strongly affirming the physical reality. Not just physical reality, but the feminine fucking body as a spiritual place of transformation and power and knowledge. Like the body itself becomes a source of knowledge and knowing and producing knowledge and wisdom. It's not abandoning the body or pretending that the body is impure or unclean, something that needs to be constricted and controlled and feared. It's the body itself. The body itself can be a source of knowledge and power and wisdom, right? My brain is just orgasming right now at these thoughts. Oh. All right, let us continue. So then a little bit later on in her description, Marie White then goes into Lilith and very much connects this image with Lilith and how Lilith, she was the first woman before Eve, and she was cast out of Eden because she refused to be subservient. She refused to be the bottom. She refused to lie under Adam, and she refused to let him dominate her. And so she was, cast out, which is also very badass. I know there's a lot of us in the pagan and witchy communities that work with Lilith and find empowerment in her. And then she goes into a description of the High Priestess and the womb space as a space of potentiality and chaos. So let me get into that little paragraph here. Comparing her, the High Priestess, to the Empress is like comparing the Fool to the Magician. The Fool is nothing, 0, and the Magician is everything, 1. Likewise, the High Priestess is the feminine nothing to the non-form of chaos, space, emptiness, void, vacuum. The womb wherein fertility can take place, the empty space where God is not. While the Empress is everything, life, bounty, abundance, the filled and overflowing womb of Mother Earth. So there she's kind of situating the High Priestess in relation to the card that comes before, the Magician, the card that comes after, the Empress. And so obviously this High Priestess has a very big pregnant belly, and she has at the least 4 large engorged breasts. And we have a crescent moon image here, and of course she has no clear distinguishable face, right? And so this idea of the void kind of goes along with the idea of the hymen as this liminal space, and liminality is such a powerful idea, and it shows up in so many different world cultures and spiritual practices and religions. And I know for a fact that a lot of us witches and witchy folk really do a lot of work in that liminal space and time. The liminal here is presented as a space and time of potentiality. It is kind of like the present moment. If you think of the present moment as that liminal space and time between the past and the future, and in that present moment where you can exercise power and control to manifest and to affect the future, but you can also kind of time travel back into the past, right? The past and the future are zones of potentiality or zones of influence, right? And also we have a very rich tradition of hedge witchery, of altered states, of the idea of the hedge as being that liminal space between the wild and the tamed, right? If you think about the forest and wild woodlands as the space of nature, under the realm and control of nature, versus the garden and the domestic sphere and space as being the realm of the human. And so the hedge witch enters or crosses between those two spaces as she enters into the liminal space of the hedge to work with the best of both worlds, so to speak, and to communicate with spirits and all that kind of stuff. I mean, liminality, like I said, is just so powerful because it's that in-between space or in-between time where anything can happen, right? And there are those of us, those who are spiritually or witchly inclined, who can harness that, who are willing to go there into those uncomfortable spaces to exercise power and choice, right? And so the womb then becomes the void, the empty space where anything can happen. It's like, as I was kind of taking notes and organizing my thoughts for this video, I thought about kind of the empty blank canvas for the artist, or the blank page for the writer. Anything can fill that canvas or that page. And even in like sculpture, you have the idea of negative space. In 3D sculptures, you have kind of unused portions in different artists' canvases, or even in some more modernist poetry or avant-garde works, you'll see like the words are scattered across the page. And so the empty, unused space becomes just as important, if not more important, than the space that is filled by the sculpture, by the painter, by the poet, right? It conveys meaning. And so if you think about the womb here in a very metaphorical way, right? A symbolic way, archetypal way. The womb or the cosmic egg, or, you know, we have all these images of the great emptiness that is just waiting to be filled, right? And again, entering into that emptiness or working with that emptiness itself can be so powerful. And I very much liken that to that liminal space and time. And so, yeah, man, this video is approaching 30 minutes, but I think it's appropriate since we're talking about my favorite card. And my matron, who herself represents that it's kind of interesting, like if you look up, just Google images of the Venus of Willendorf, or the Venus, like different Venus statues as they're called from 20, 30, 40,000 years ago. They're all very round, corpulent, fertile looking female figures. But it's so, in my mind, they represent potentiality, you know? We see this big pregnant belly and we just assume that there's a baby in there, but actually it's the power of the emptiness itself, right? And so that's very much how I work with my matron, and that's why this card reminds me so much of my matron and actually started my journey with her. So before I keep rambling, let me just explain or describe why I have some of these stones here. Of course, I have labradorite. Labradorite is such a spiritual stone. These are my only 2 pieces. I would love to get more in the future, but I'm about to move abroad, so downsizing. But yeah, labradorite just speaks to me of the very cosmic level of things, the as above end of that as above so below thing, you know. This is very much helps me connect with the as above aspect of that. And yeah, it's so powerful. This particular piece, I don't know if it's going to show up in camera. Let me see. Kind of. I don't know if you can tell, but right around here, there's almost a circle within this greater circle. And it just reminds me of an eye. So it's very much a seeing stone. Helps me to reach those cosmic levels. And this piece is just gorgeous. Labradorite is such a powerful, beautiful stone. Then here, of course, I have some obsidian. And shout out to the pagan scholar who sent me this beautiful piece of obsidian like a year or 2 ago. I can't exactly remember, but thank you so much. This is actually a piece that I've dedicated to my matron. It stands right behind a little Venus statue that I have on my altar. And I love obsidian, and I relate obsidian so much to this High Priestess energy, but also more specifically to my matron, because this is volcanic glass. So this was born under the heat and pressure deep inside the earth, and then it just, you know, the earth vomits it up, it gives birth to it in this violent, you know, volcanic eruption. And so it just speaks to me of that fire, that spiritual fire, but also the darkness of being deep into the void, right? So this is just, it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful, big, chunky piece of obsidian. And of course, another very spiritual stone. We have amethyst, and this was also sent to me by Travis about a year or two ago. And I also dedicate this piece. I almost work with this like a wand, and I leave it as an offering to my matron. And then lastly, we have my hagstone, and this hagstone I actually found at the fishing creek where my dad would take us fishing when I was a kid in Kentucky. And if you notice, it's actually a fossil. Kentucky, millions of years ago, was actually underwater, was part of the ocean. That's why we have so much coal. So it's really, this kind of helps me tie back to that very ancient feeling that I get from the High Priestess. And also the fact that it's a hagstone. I mean, looking through the hagstone and scrying through the hagstone is a very liminal, witchy act. It's a very interesting way to cross into those border territories between altered states and consensus reality, or between the past and the future, or between the wild and the tamed, right? I think that's where hagstones really get their power. So it's, I love this stone. I love the fact that it's a fossil and it's also a hagstone, and you can see through it. It's really interesting. So that's why I brought those stones and crystals out. So anyhow, I better end this now before I keep rambling. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, I'll have links below in the description box. The link to the Tarot Favorites playlist if you want to check out the Fool and the Magician video. And I'll also have it pop up here. And next time, maybe toward the end of November or early December, we'll be talking about the Empress, which is exciting. So, yeah, until next time, many blessings and happy witching.